Assembly of the CT175 is nearing completion as I slowly check things off my list. Unfortunately, I've got a problem that needs attention. When I first started this project, I did a quick test run of the engine. At the time, I noticed on the video that the front sprocket was rotating while the motorcycle was in neutral. I didn't think much of it. The engine sounded solid and I thought it might just be rotating from the torque of the engine, and there was no chain or rear wheel on there to stop it. The clutch lever and the cable are original to the bike. When I had this cable off, I tested it, and it's not perfect, but there's not as much friction in there as I'm experiencing after everything's been assembled. The clutch cable comes into the left side of the engine right here. On this side you can see this plate, and this is the adjusting screw for the clutch. On the other side of this, there's a push rod that runs through the engine. When I pull off this cover, you'll be able to see better what I'm talking about with this clutch mechanism. Here's the cable coming in. When the clutch lever is pulled, it lifts up on this arm, and this is the end of that adjusting screw. And as this raises, there's a gear in there that pushes this mechanism in. So it's actually rotating, and that adjusting screw moves in when you push on the clutch. That adjusting screw pushes against this rod. This rod is the rod that goes through the crankcase to the other side where the clutch basket and the clutch plates are. This rod then moves that those clutch plates in and out as the clutch lever is pulled in. Behind this cover on the right side of this bike is where the clutch lives. To get to that, I've got to drain the oil, I've got to remove this kickstarter here, and then I have to remove all of these Allen bolts from the crankcase. I've seen Phillips screw heads here. I've also seen regular hex head bolts. So I'm going to pull this off, and then we'll see what's going on with the clutch itself. I've got a couple of screwdrivers here, and I'm putting them in just so that I don't lose this opening. I'm not using these to pry this apart because I don't want to ding up this aluminum cover here, and I don't want to put any grooves in there that may end up causing an oil leak later on. So I'm just taking these screwdrivers and slowly working my way around this, trying to open this gap up. The back side looks pretty good, but this front edge down here across there, that's still being a little bit stubborn right through here. So I'm going to slowly work my way around, coming from the back, coming from the top, and eventually I'll get this cover off. Well, with most projects there always seems to be something that gets in the way of progress. I've managed to split the seal around this clutch cover and the crankcase almost entirely, except up here in the front. It doesn't seem to want to be splitting. My fear is that this bolt here, which used to be a Phillips head screw, is holding that together. Even though when I look through the manual it says that you don't need to remove the oil injector here, and so I assumed that you should be able to take this whole cover off with this portion of the cover still in place. But this right here lines up with kind of the area that is not coming apart. This thing is 35 plus years old, and it's probably never been moved. And of course the head of it is stripping out. So I'm going to have to get creative and try to at least get the head of this bolt off so I can pull this cover, figure out what's going on behind there. First thing I've done to try to remove this was just hit it with some penetrating oil, let that soak in there. Then I used my drill in reverse on the hammer setting and tried to vibrate it out. That wasn't working, and it was starting to strip the inside of this bolt here. Then I tried to do it by hand, and ultimately I've pretty much stripped the end of that out. I can't really get a pair of vice grips in there. There's not enough room. So I've pretty much resorted to getting out my screw extractor set. And basically I need to drill into the head of this screw far enough in that as I put this extractor in, put a wrench on the end of it, it will bite into the metal and hopefully break that loose. There's probably not much torque on that screw, it's just corroded in place. So we're going to go for it. Well, it's just as I suspected. There was no indication in the manual that that bolt needed to be removed or that you even needed to remove this cover. But as you can see, the length of that bolt goes clear into the engine crankcase. Well, to get this off the rest of the way, I've got to do something about the pegs. Right now, the bike's leaning on the kickstand, but that is one complete assembly, so I'm going to have to put this up on a block. But as I'm pulling this cover off, I'm seeing parts fall into my oil pan. It's a good thing I jumped into this. This could have been bad. We'll see what's going on. As I pull this off, I've got to push down on the brake lever just to clear it. And there we go. Now we're going to start rooting around in here See if we can figure out where those parts were coming from. Okay, so there is a plastic gear, and it was just sitting in the bottom. That's obviously not the places that it's supposed to be. I've got some dirt that's managed to kind of creep its way into here. On the cover, there's a hole which used to be for one of the cables that come off the throttle cable that controlled the oil injection system. That was removed, and they tried to plug that up, but it has allowed some sediment and some debris to get in there over the years. So we're going to clean that out before we put this back together and clog that hole back up. As I look down here in the bottom, I've got another large flat washer. And I remember when I was draining the oil out of this, I heard something drop into that oil drain bucket. So I need to get in there, figure out what that was. So far, those are the only parts that I'm seeing. Actually, I see a nut that's hiding down under here as well. So eventually I'm going to figure out where all of this goes. I believe I have tracked down all of the pieces that were falling out, and they belong to the now defunct oil injection system, the oil pump. On the other side is where the body of the oil pump sat. This spun around, and on the inside there's a hole in that shaft, and I had this little pin that was the first thing that fell out of this crankcase cover. And then I had a couple of washers that dropped down on here somehow. Here is a gear, and you can see that groove. That's where that rod sat. So this would sit on top of here. That rod would keep that gear static so that it would spin around and drive in the engine compartment. And then there was a nut. So this is no longer needed, and I saw a thread on the internet where someone had removed this, and on this side they had just made a flat metal cover with a gasket and placed it in there. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get rid of this so that I don't ever have to worry about this piece of machinery getting in the way. But that's going to be something on the side just before I put this back together. So getting back to the clutch, we have the basket, we have the plates right here. That rod from the other side comes through, and underneath here there's going to be a type of piston, if you will, that pushes this plate out to disengage the engine. So I'm going to remove these bolts here. I'm going to keep track of which ones go where so that as this goes back together, all of the springs are in the same place and the tension remains constant. Now, it may not be crucial for the reassembly of this which screw and which spring goes where. I've been looking on here to try and find something to kind of index, to consider maybe my 12 o'clock position, but I don't see anything that really stands out. So I'm going to use my little trick here where I take a center punch, and I'm just going to put a small little divot. You can barely see that. Sitting right there. That's going to be my 12 o'clock. So now I'll take this one out, line them up like this as we go around, then that way I'll know which ones go back to their location. I'm going to put this in gear so that it doesn't have a tendency to move. I'm also going to place the handle of this mallet in the spokes to kind of help keep that from wanting to roll forward. Because these are Phillips, these are going to be challenging enough to get out without all of that free movement. And it doesn't seem like these are going to go easy. Oh, bugger. Okay, that's going to be tough. We're going to have to come up with something else to get those moving. Whoop, running out of juice. Come on. One more to break. I managed to break all of these screws loose. Now I'm going to start taking them out. Everything is kind of rotated, but this is my 12 o'clock spring and screw. So I'm going to pull these out, and I've got a little magnetic tray, and I'm going to put these in, and that should keep them from rolling around while I pull everything apart. I don't know how critical it is that they stay in that orientation, but someone said it, so it must be true, right? If I understand this right, there shouldn't be any spring or anything that's going to push that out. But I'm just going to loosen this one a little bit while I've still got this other screw in here, just to make sure that it's not going to jump out into my lap. Okay, so there are all my screws, and I've got them in this magnetic base, so there's my 12 o'clock around. Okay, now the next step should just be to take these plates off, and there's the outside plate. Set that right there, and if I'm not mistaken, this rod right here sits on the other side where that push rod originates, where by the clutch lever, and in between here there's supposed to be a ball according to the manufacturer's diagram. So now I'm just going to start taking these plates off, and that already seems like it's stuck. Now I heard that as I pulled that apart, it almost was like peeling it. So I'm thinking that my problem with the clutch is based on the fact that these were sticking together, and it wasn't allowing this plate to push out. So I'm going to take all of these apart, clean them up, and we're going to start putting them back together. So that right there shouldn't be like that. That's corroded and rusted these discs onto this disc. So that totally explains why my clutch is so hard to press. I don't think that these are worn out necessarily, but I'm going to take some really fine grit sandpaper, clean these off. I'm going to keep track of not necessarily where the discs are in relationship to each other, except for this last one has these teeth, and it's going to go on the outside. It looks like these other ones in here might be smooth on the inside.
Okay, so gasket. Plate.
Okay, so last one off will be the first one back on, along with this rubber gasket. Like so. Everything else in there looks good. So it's just time to get these metal discs cleaned off. And then we'll put it back together. Well, I finished cleaning off these plates, and I started out at the wire wheel at my bench grinder just to get the big stuff off. And then I didn't have any 800 grit sandpaper. I tried some 1200, but it was clogging up too fast. And I don't necessarily think that these need to be polished smooth. So I used some Scotch-Brite pad that I had, and it seemed to work out really well. I also sprayed those off with some brake cleaner because there's a lot of dust from the sanding. Then I took these discs, these friction discs, and I just rubbed these by hand. You could see some of that corrosion, that rust colored material on here. So I just rubbed them by hand, wiped them off the best I could, and now we're ready to start putting this back together. Okay, last one. Just like so. Okay, piston. That piston pushes right against here. And that whole big deal I made about the screws being back in the same hole, everything has moved since then, so I'm going to say scratch that. I don't think it matters. And at this point, if they were all back in the same place, it'd just be pure luck. But we will put them back in just because we went to that trouble. After I get this all put back together, my plan is to put new oil in it, run it for a little bit, and change that oil. I think there's a lot of small dust particles that have gotten in here from all of the sanding. I had that pile of dirt that was trapped in here. Some of it went down in there. So I'll probably spray this down with some brake cleaner or some type of mild parts cleaner. Then I'll put it back together, new gasket, run some new oil through it for a little bit, and change the oil out. This bike does not have an oil filter. Well, we had success. Clutch moves. You can see that this is moving out when the clutch is pulled in. That allows everything to spin, releases, puts pressure on the plates. So that's job's done. Thanks for watching.